Hello, my name is Ana Silva from Thriving. Today I have a special guest. I'm so honored to have Sarah with us today, and I want to invite you to hear about the incredible story of courage that she has to share. She's a transgender woman and learning how to reconcile her gender identity, her femininity, and at the same time her faith. So go ahead and visit our channel, Thriving. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Thriving. I'm Ana Silva, and today I am so excited for you to meet my friend Sarah. Sarah, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this. You are a transgendered woman. But before you have embraced all this beauty and your gender, your femininity, you used to be a husband and a youth leader, in a position of leadership in a quite traditional Christian environment. Mm-hmm. Now, how did it feel to live with that struggle, that conflict for 15 years, this conflict between who you truly are and what you believed that you needed to be in society, in your faith community?
Honestly, as you said, coming from an evangelical, very traditional, almost fundamentalist sort of church background, the way that I conceptualized my sort of inner struggle with my gender, gender dysphoria is the sort of medical term, but that incongruence with who I've always felt that I am and who I was, assigned at birth to be, assigned male at birth or whatever.
Yeah.
I always conceptualize that as like sin of the flesh, like a sexual sin.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that it had nothing to do with, another person's body, had, only to do with, who I saw looking back in the mirror being incongruent with who I guess always felt that I was. So I approached it as such, and there's a lot of language in sort of the Christian tradition to describe sin and how you approach sin, and that's how I approached my gender dysphoria, was as if it was a sin. And it's something that I could never overcome. I mean, 15 years of very earnest, effort to overcome this sin, and it turns out that this is who I am. This is an immutable part of who I am, and I can't change that.
Yes.
I tried.
You tried, and you tried for too long. Now, well, how were you able to do it for so long though? It's I mean, it had to be excruciating. It had to be.
Well, there were a lot of things in my life that were going really well. Like, I was married to a woman, and we had 2 beautiful children together, and genuinely in love with her, genuinely attracted to her. My sexuality the title's changed, but I've always been attracted to women.
Yeah.
So that wasn't broken, right? Mm-hmm. So marrying a woman came natural. Mm-hmm. And, having kids and, all those things. But I really put forth very earnest effort, to do all of the things that were sort of prescribed, to the good Christian man sort of things to do. I married young at 19. We immediately started having kids. We built a house together. I joined the military, served for 7 years total. Went to school at University of Washington to become a physician assistant. Very much just throwing myself at all of these noble pursuits. I went to Bible school. I pastored a college ministry, led a couple different youth ministries.
Wow.
Served in one, led another. I think that's ultimately how I, kind of lasted so long before I came to a sort of a breaking point. Is that I did have a lot of like good things going in my life to kind of, I think, occupy myself.
Yes.
So that I didn't have to deal with it.
Let's go back to the breaking point. What was the breaking point? Do you remember, were there specific things that happened to your life, or a combination of things, where there was no other way? You had to finally face that. You had to finally commit to that journey.
I feel like I have to break it down into two different things. Like, there was the breaking point, which I can speak to, but I wouldn't have come to that probably as clearly unless I had sort of gained the language to describe, my experience, my internal experience with my gender. So, as I mentioned that, I my self-concept and the way that I understood my struggle with my gender was always as this like sexual sin,
Yeah.
and really it was somebody very close to me, kind of who was a very outspoken voice of kind of transphobia and homophobia, and this person was very influential in my life, and suddenly there was a shift in their sort of rhetoric, like they were sort of loosening their grips on that. Maybe they were seeing things differently, and that sort of liberated me to kind of start actually thinking about my struggles with my gender, and actually really looking at it as something other than just sin.
Yes.
And that funny enough, later on I found out that it was a total misunderstanding. Like, they weren't listening their views one iota. However, that internal work had already started, and really it didn't take much time of like even perceived non-judgment for it all to just come spilling out. And within a few months I was well on my way to starting hormones in transition, and it was It was wild, and I mean really too fast, honestly. Wow. But there was a breaking point. Like, my marriage was going to end if I transitioned, and that broke me. I didn't want to lose my marriage. And so I really did everything that I could to salvage my marriage and to prevent it from ending. But it really came down to, that absolutely required me to not be transgender, to be healed of it, to, again, the framework of understanding, gender dysphoria or transgender people at large within this belief system was that it was, sin or sickness or one or the other,
yes.
or both, and it had to be fixed.
Yes.
And so I entertained that. Even I went to what turned out to essentially be a conversion therapist in Colorado. It was an intensive marriage retreat with this counselor pastor who specialized in sex addiction. And he told me that my gender dysphoria was a fetish, and it was a sex addiction. It has nothing to do with another human body.
Yeah.
Mind you, it has nothing to do with sex whatsoever.
Yeah.
However, that was, and that's how I've always self-conceptualized my dysphoria. And so I, my marriage was on the line. I leaned into this, and what ended up happening is that it confirmed all of the wrong things that I believed about myself. And if anything, I wasn't hard enough on myself. It was kind of the message here. And it was a 3-day retreat, and on the second day, I was suicidal. It broke me. And ironically, looking back, that 3-day retreat was probably the single most influential thing leading me towards transition.
Interesting. Which almost broke you.
Right.
But it forced you into out fully as yourself. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. What it did was it confirmed in my mind that there is no mechanism, within Christianity that could heal me of dysphoria, because or that I could shift some kind of behavior or internal, thought process, or like spiritual bondage, or all these words that are used to describe sins or whatever. There's really nothing that could be done to alleviate this crushing dysphoria, this incongruence with my gendered body and like my spirit, my soul, who I am, and you know, and I mean, because God knows I tried everything, right? And this was like the final effort, and it really backfired in a big way. Like it harmed me in a really big way, but also, you know, pushed me towards transition.
Yes. Do you have memories early in your childhood of this kind of conflict already being internalized, being embodied?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I didn't have the language. I wouldn't have ever said I'm transgender or whatever. But you know, as early as pre-K, my best friend, her name was Brittany, and I know this is pre-K because she moved away. We were in pre-K together, then she moved away before kindergarten, and it was when we were friends. I remember developing this theory that I was born a woman or a girl, you know, whatever, and then the doctors switched me. You know, they sewed on a little appendage, right? And I believed this so hardly. I don't know if I believed that all the way through into, like, you know, adolescence into puberty, but I do remember when puberty was kind of starting, which was a very distressing kind of time period because my body was masculinizing very quickly.
Yeah.
And some things were changing and growing very quickly. And I remember thinking like, this is very dynamic. This is changing. This is growing. This can't be, you know, sewn on last minute. This, you know, like, I don't know if I actually believed it from like age 5 to 12 or whatever, but I know at age 12, I still held on to that belief enough to like think, oh, well, that can't be. What a dumb thing to think, you know.
Yeah. But all the ways that we try to rationalize, right? I think even though you didn't have the language, you already had the acute understanding of this conflict. And you try to create the language by creating that, that reality, you know.
You know,
even though,
Yeah, a funny story. I was in first grade, Mr. Jones' class. I remember vividly, I had this plan, you know, that a boy could become a girl, and I depersonalized it so that I could talk to people. This is because I didn't, you know, I didn't really share or verbalize my, you know, gender exploration, except that a few instances where I was able to depersonalize it, then I felt okay to share. And one of these things was, you know, I had this idea like a boy could become a girl, and all that they had to do was, you know, grow their hair out and wear the correct clothes and lop off the wiener because obviously, and then the funny one that still to this day like kind of cracks me up is like swallow a nail because it will dislodge and it will raise the pitch of your voice.
That sounds like torture.
I believed it though. Like God. I believed this was possible and this is how you would do it.
Oh wow.
So I had conceptualized like, you know, gender confirmation surgery like as a first grader, you know. Anyhow, so
and I think also too is that you had so much pain associated to even to that transition. You know, you wanted to simplify, you wanted to make it possible that it's okay for a boy to become a girl. You want to simplify it, but there's always pain attached to it because every single one of this, you know, the majority of this process is that you said, you know, they're painful. And I think one way or the other, right, we became to just internalize more and more that there's so much pain in being you.
You know, I hadn't thought of it that way, but really, you know, I mean, really, you're right. You know, you are, you know, the work of, you know, creating that just congruence with who you are and who you look like.
Yeah.
You know,
I never had to think about it, you know, ask for permission to wear a dress, ask for permission to wear makeup, to look this way. And there was no pain associated with being me.
Yeah.
Fully me.
Well, it's funny, you know, you say that and I'm like, oh my God, that makes sense.
Yeah.
As you take that for granted, I take for granted that, you mean not everybody struggles with their gender? You know, not everybody has this, you know, to deal with, but it's been something that has, you know, been there since the very beginning, you know.
I have to ask, how did it feel to have finally your outward body to fully represent the way you feel inward inside. How did it feel to come out on the streets looking this gorgeous? How, like, tell me that moment. How did it feel like?
Well, it's been a very gradual transition.
Yeah.
I started taking estrogen, 22 months ago, and it's really progressively, slowly feminized my body. It's softened my face, redistributed fat, gave me boobs. So so it's it wasn't an overnight kind of thing, but I do remember the first time that I went out, kind of in women's clothing, presenting female, I guess.
Yeah.
I didn't look female at all, outwardly, like I was very masculine appearing, but I went and met a good friend who had been kind of been a support throughout this sort of self-exploration period of like 6 or 8 months or whatever prior to this point. And, he hadn't seen me. It was all been over the phone because we were living in different parts of the state, and we met up in, near Seattle, and we met at the mall, and we were, just having a cup of coffee, and just minutes into our meeting, he kind of looks at me, he's like, I've been behind you 100%. I've intellectually understood where you're at, and, you have my full support, you always have, but seeing you, now I get it. Now I understand, and so to answer your question directly, I think just natural is the way that I describe it. Like, the question's almost hard to answer. It's like if I were to ask you, like, what does it feel to walk in shoes without a pebble in your shoes, digging into your flesh?
Yeah.
You'd be like, well, I guess it feels good.
Yeah.
It's
normal.
As I've transitioned.
That's a beautiful analogy. I like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really, if anything, it's been a relief of pain. It's been a relief of a weight that's been kind of ever present, or like a pebble in the shoe,
Yeah.
And that's been the blessing of transitioning, is that, this doesn't occupy a large chunk of my mental real estate anymore,
Did you cross-dress before?
It's funny, as unexpectedly, right? As a young child, I did. I would come home from school.
As a young child?
Elementary school.
Oh.
My parents would work till like 6 p.m. or something.
Yeah.
And I would come home and lock myself in my parents' room and put on my mom's clothing.
Oh.
And that was, I guess, my gender exploration at that stage. But once puberty hit, suddenly my body was taking this very masculine form. I've always had that longing to look in the mirror and see, looking back, what I felt I identified with, right?
Yeah.
And I would put on a piece of women's clothing, like a single garment, and I would just have a panic attack because what I saw looking back was not what I wanted to see looking back, and a piece of clothing wouldn't fix that, right? And it almost, it almost accentuated my masculinity.
Interesting.
So no, I always had that desire, but I'd never fully cross-dressed or put on a full outfit, so to speak. Never done my makeup. Had never had like a wig.
Yeah.
Until I started transitioning.
Wow.
And it's funny, like early on in transition, I was living full time as myself, and going back to see my kids, traveling back to Wenatchee. I was living in Seattle, traveling, a few hours to go see my kids every other weekend. I would, in the early stages, I would dress up as a boy, put on guys' clothes, my former clothes. Yeah. And that was cross-dressing. That felt like cross-dressing.
Yes,
which
I
is
love that. Yes.
Kind of funny.
True.
Yeah, it
is.
It's
true.
Yeah.
That was cross-dressing. You did that for too long.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. You said there was someone that were very influential in this as a part of a breakthrough in you fully embracing your gender and your femininity. Have you found a community that are able to do the same? people that have gone through that journey too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, funny enough, that influential person I speak of was somebody who was very restrictive, very condemning and homophobic and transphobic and all of these things. And once that was, that eased up just even slightly, that's when I started to really seek out community and seek out sort of the narratives and stories of other trans people and really asking the question, like, am I transgender? Like, could I be transgender? Like, am I transgender enough to transition? And really, like, it's funny, being, a medical provider, like, I approach it very diagnostically. Like, do I meet all the criteria? And really, so to answer your question directly, yes, it was Reddit. Funny enough, Reddit and YouTube. YouTube is a place that people go and they would share, kind of their transition timelines, or they had channels that talked about their transition or things, things of that nature. And Reddit was a place, it's, for those who don't know, it's, this online forum that's just massive, this one, there are many communities, many forums, but this one called Ask Transgender, it's like 75,000 people who subscribe to it. And, maybe, who knows the gender of all these people, but likely many of them are transgender. And you could ask any question. You post a question and then people would respond. And so I posted, several questions, but really I spent most of my time reading other people's questions. I found questions that I identify with. And then I read the responses. It was very much like seeking out people who I had commonality with before they transitioned, and trying to like connect the dots and find those, find that confirmation, because I had such insecurity about, I was leaning into this identity that was just strictly and unabashedly forbidden, in my faith community, which was everything to me, right? And so it was like I needed to know. I remember I had a therapist, and I wrote out this, I think it was like 15 or 20 page, kind of log of every, like at every age and stage of my life, like what were the manifestations of gender dysphoria and expressions of like gender exploration and so on. Because I wanted her to read it and be like, nope, you're not transgender, and be like, okay, I need to go get prayer or whatever, or like, yes, you're transgender, like you need to transition.
Diagnosed, but basically, yes, you needed that validation, but you found, that's beautiful. It's beautiful because I feel like you searched to know other people's experience. You search professionals, but you search within. And that's that's when you knew, right? You had that within, and that validation there.
What was really challenging is that, no medical professional, mental health professional would look me in the eye and say, yes, you are transgender. The only relief is to transition, because that inherently in that is this kind of pathologizing of being transgender. Like you are broken and medicine can fix you. They refused to give me that, and I wanted it so badly, but they wouldn't give it to me, and really left me to, wrestle with, my identity, wrestle with my history, wrestle with all of these things that, have kind of led me up until this point. But really,
it's remarkable what you have done, because from your faith community, that's the message that you got, that there was something intrinsically wrong with you, and if you prayed enough, if you were godly enough, if you did enough, that would change. God would change you. And then, so that from your faith community, and then from your medical community, it was almost like, okay, diagnose me with an issue and prescribe me something. So in both sides, the message that you got is that there is something wrong with me that needs fixing. And it's incredible, remarkable that despite those influences and those voices, you were able to say, to come to your full self now and know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, that you were not a mistake.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Are you still a Christian? Do you still consider yourself a Christian?
So the jury's still out. You know, excuse me, I would say yes. My answer would be yes. I for a long time, I came out to my family 2 years and 3 months ago, let's say, give or take. And I experienced this immediate, like, just tearing apart and this being sort of ripped out of my faith community. They wouldn't relent this notion that I was sinning, and or I was sick, like a disorder, that needed to be like repented of and healed, kind of thing, and I wouldn't accept that, and thus, because I wouldn't conform to their sort of conceptualization, which I had conformed to like for 15 years plus.
Yes.
I had my whole support system just ripped out from underneath me, and just experienced just tremendous loss. And so I have a lot of wounds. So I want to acknowledge that up front. In terms of the way that Christianity, evangelical fundamentalist Christianity has, they've really abandoned me with, like no viable option. So for a lot of time, I didn't feel welcome in the church, right? So I wouldn't feel okay using that title, right? If I'm not welcome in a church, how can I say I'm a Christian?
Yes.
And it's really a very recent development that I've started to sort of realize that, my spirituality is something that, I really tried to run from. I was angry, still have a lot of anger, frankly, about, the way that I was treated, the way that people who don't fit their mold, LGBTQ plus, and many other people, divorcees, so on, the list goes on and on. I lost my train of thought. I wouldn't readily have used that title, but I'm at a point in my life now where I feel, confident enough in who I am, and recognize how wrong they are.
Yes.
That I feel empowered to reclaim my faith and to reclaim, my community in a sense.
Isn't that so, interesting that, the people of faith and the people that claim to belong to this God that is love can be the most cruel ones.
Certainly they wouldn't have seen it as cruelty, right? They would have seen it as like, I was broken and they had the antidote in their mind, right? But what people would fail to acknowledge or realize is that I spent 15 years clinging to the antidote.
Yeah.
And
but that also implies that you were the only broken one. It implies that, that we aren't, that the rest of us aren't, that we got it together. And that's a fundamental lie. Yeah. Now, have you found a community, a faith community, that you don't only feel like you are accepted, it's like it's okay for you to be here. You are welcomed, you are celebrated, and you see people that have walked the same kind of a journey around that community. Have you found that?
So it's been a journey, and I've been extraordinarily fortunate to find, this, church locally in Seattle here, Eastlake.
Eastlake Community Church, we love you.
Seriously.
Yes.
It's a community where, from day one, I felt just entirely welcomed, embraced, loved for precisely who I am, and nothing more, nothing less. Like there was no impetus to perform, some role to meet some expectation.
Yeah.
And that's a rare thing.
Yes.
I went to Bible school. I was a pastor for a time. I know the inner theology and doctrine of many of these churches, and and so it really, that was almost made it harder in a sense, because I know what they believe.
Yeah.
And what's really troubling is that many times you go and you as a guest at this church, you go and you ask them, am I welcome here? Can I lay down my roots here and be a fully integrated, thriving member of this church community?
Yeah.
And it's a bold-faced lie. They look you in the eye and they say, yes, we love you. Come and make this your home and be a part of our community. And frankly, it's a bold-faced lie because, again, I know the theology. I know their doctrine.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes down to it, if I want to marry a woman, my pastor won't perform the ceremony.
Wow.
Hell, my friends aren't going to come, right? If I make this community my social sort of network and support structure, they're not going to support me in who I marry and choose to love, right? Or they won't affirm my gender, right? Like they won't truly affirm who I am, or both. But they won't tell you that, and it's it makes finding a church community very hard, because you don't discover that, until you've let down your guard and you've integrated into this community and you've become very vulnerable and you've fallen in love with the people and they've fallen in love with you. And now all of a sudden, I want to be baptized, or I want to help lead a ministry, or I want to marry somebody. And they're like, nope.
That's a bit too much. You went way too far over there, right?
And then you realize you are fundamentally a second-class citizen. And the impetus, that the subtext, is that you have to meet their expectations in terms of, you have to, and they wouldn't even say it that way. They would say that, if you're going to follow the Lord, you need to, bear the fruits of true repentance. And, they'd have all this spiritual language and even verses to kind of basically rebuke you, to say that, you're not living uprightly. And so we love you, but we can't love your sin, and so it's just the most sinister thing ever. Like, there's this website, I want to just plug it, churchclarity.org, and it's this website that calls churches to put forth very clearly what their beliefs are about women in ministry, about queer people, LGBTQ plus people in ministry, or gay marriage, and so membership.
Where do you stand? I was just about to say that, because the simple fact that you would have to come to a community and say, by the way, I'm a transgender woman, I'm gay, is it okay? It's like me, by the way, as you can see, I'm black, and I don't look like you all. Is it still okay for me to be here? The simple fact that we should wonder that right there for me is wrong. There's a disconnection there. And the fact that, and I love that you brought that up, I think that our faith communities should be straightforward about where do they stand.
Frankly, I would rather be met at the door and told to get the hell out of here, you queer tranny. Pardon the exploitation and the slurs. I would 100-fold rather be met at the door and told to kick rocks. Than to be integrated and falsely welcomed, and then months or years down the road, then be confronted with the fact that they never had any intention of fully embracing who I am in the first place, knowingly. It's the most painful thing. I've lost my faith community once already, and I don't know that I could survive that kind of thing again. And when you fail to, clearly express what your stances are about gay marriage, marriage equality, about, gender equality, about all these things, you are setting somebody up for that kind of just prolific brokenness. and pain that comes from your faith community just being ripped out from underneath you.
Finally, Sarah, what would you say to your younger self, to your 10-year-old self?
I would tell my 10-year-old self that there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing, that you're okay. That God loves you just as you are. That your family will love you just as you are as well, because my family's been supportive. That to embrace what I've always known, right? Because and I'll be honest, having waited until 29 to come out, I had a 10-year marriage, that wasn't fair to my wife, my ex-wife, to lose her husband, right? It wasn't fair to my kids to have to experience this uproar in their, this upheaval in their family. I have zero regrets about my family. Obviously, I absolutely cherish my children, but had I been okay with who I am from the beginning, it would have saved so much heartache for myself, but also down, the ripple effect. I think that it could have saved a lot of heartache and pain for a lot of other people.
Yes. I love that you have compassion. You're clearly a very compassionate person, and you can position yourself in their perspective and what they have lost. But you also can extend that compassion to you and to say, it wasn't fair to you to be confined into so, strict gender roles, to be confined into, to be somewhat, born into that struggle. And it is not okay for you to have lost the ones that you thought that were friends and family in your community. It wasn't fair to you. And I love that you have compassion for them, but we can extend the same compassion to you and also see how brave you are, the incredible example that you are for so many of us that, I think that when I see your story, it kind of reassures my need to be fully embodied, my need to unapologetically be who I am.
That's beautiful. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you do that just by being you. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for being here. What a pleasure.
You betcha.
Thank you, everybody. This is our beautiful Sarah. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
And stay tuned for our next episode of Thriving. I'm Ana Silva. Have a good night. I'm Ana Silva. Deuces.